So I want to welcome back to the stage Dr. Kathleen Wolf, who I'm so happy to have here with us, and she's going to bring us full circle through what we've heard these last few days. And I was talking to her and Michelle Lannon on the break, and we were talking about mutualism and symbiotic relationships, and I think that's our through line for this conference. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about reciprocity.
All right, so from 30-something hours ago, I went from lush greenery to helmets and chainsaws. Hey, that's this group, I could tell. So I started yesterday talking about why what you do is so important. And I think based on feedback, conversations I've had, I think I convinced many of you that you are indeed not only tree care providers, but healthcare providers. And so I'm going to take that another step here with this presentation. I'm going to use some material that really is just in development, and so I'll put it out there. Unfortunately, you're all ready to jump in the car or however else you're moving around and move along back to your lives. Would have loved to have some follow-up conversations about this, but maybe there's another time. What I'm going to talk about is reciprocity, and it's a word that's getting a lot of attention now with regard to natural resources, human ecology, human dimensions, those sorts of things. So I'll share some of the recent work and recent thoughts some colleagues and I have been having about that. And again, here we are at the time of a conference. You know, it's kind of brain mush time, right? There's a lot to process, some great information, wonderful speakers. This has been a lot of fun. And again, I thank the sponsors and organizers of this event. You've done a fantastic job, and really do appreciate that. So let me start with a phrase that's in the title of my talk. What is a virtuous loop? And people have had all sorts of names for this sort of cycle of some sort of effort, something that you do, and then there's success, and then that feeds energy and resolve and commitment, and you keep doing more. And this is something that in particular is appearing in business trainings. Let's create the virtuous cycle. Let's create the virtuous loop. But I suggest to you that you, in your work, with your clients, with your organizations, also contribute to the health of our planet, the health of our communities, if you will, in terms of a virtuous loop. It includes chain reactions, sometimes a small action, maybe like nature's notebook, for instance. A small action then generates or contributes to a much larger propulsion change. There are snowball effects. It becomes self-sustaining, so something that initially takes some effort to get rolling, to kick off, starts to mobilize and move on its own, be it by people or resources or policies at a local government level. And then there's systemic growth. You start to see expansion and energy, and people start to take that growth and take that success and leverage it to generate similar, parallel, corollary sorts of things. So virtuous loop is what I'm talking about and how that might emerge across communities. So let me start now with a project that I've been involved with a little over a year. Community forestry pioneers. They're groups of people across our country that, for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about in a little bit here, had the gumption to start a local tree nonprofit in their city or in their state. And so about a year ago, a little over a year ago, a group of these pioneers, we'll call them pioneers, they decided to hold a reunion. And if you look at this picture, you see a lot of gray hair. A lot of gray hair. People started these things decades ago. And some of them, as I think about it, that 40-year mark for Think Trees, that was about the time when a lot of these people were kicking off their organizations as well. So anyway, they came together in Atlanta, Georgia. And as they were organizing this, they contacted me and they said, hey, you know, Kathy, you're a social scientist. Some of us have worked with you over the years. Do you have any ideas about this gathering? And I'm not very good about saying no. So I started to offer some ideas, and we had some Zoom calls and whatnot. And it turned into, Kathy, why don't you come to the event? And I did. And it was just such a blast. Such a blast. It was a very joyful reunion. 2 days. We held it at the Trees Atlanta compound, or Trees Atlanta organizational center. There was a lot of red wine. There were a lot of old fashions. There were a lot of good foods. And we just shared recollections. Well, part of my involvement was in this is they said, we would like some sort of archive. We would like some sort of collection, some sort of memory hold for what we have talked about while we're all together. So we started on that. A major an initiative for why people even started to talk about this was memory of Sue Probert, Tree, New Mexico. How many of you knew Sue? Yeah, worthy of applause, definitely. I don't believe I ever met her, but the opening ceremony, if you will, of this event was a testimony to her, some of her early efforts and her generosity in sharing startup efforts and startup ideas with other people around the country. So here we are, we landed. Trees Atlanta has this wonderful center, including a big conference room. We landed, we arrived, we sat around, we talked. Some of it structured, some of it just open conversations. We laughed a lot. Oh my gosh, some of the stories. It was so much fun. And then we turned to, well, this wisdom that we have within this group of people, how do we collect that? And that was my role. So what I had suggested, they first said, hey, we want to video everyone. And I said, well, you know, video production is pretty expensive. Why don't you just do audio interviews? And they said, great idea. Kathy, will you do that? And so that became my contribution to this. So we had 15 of the pioneers, and we had 45-minute interviews for each of them. They were structured interviews. Various scientists here. One thing I really have enjoyed about this conference is they have given all of us, each of the science geeks here, a full hour to do our presentations. Sometimes I get these invitations and I'm told, oh, come talk to us, we'll give you 20 minutes. You can't even get warmed up in 20 minutes. So to have a full hour is really generous of Think Trees. And so we took the same approach. We gave everyone 45 minutes in addition to the general conversations to recall those decades, to recall the startup, to recall what got things going. And so they told us, where did it all begin? What were their stories? Here's one. Andy Lipkiss, Tree People, Los Angeles. Again, an early founder and quite generous, we came to understand, to other organizations across the country. He was trying to plant trees. He's a kid just out of college. He's trying to plant trees in his neighborhood, and he gets wind of the state forestry department is going to bulldoze under a bunch of trees that were not planted in the wildland forest. He gets going on it. He contacts the governor's office. He gets an article written in the Los Angeles Times, and he is able to stop the bulldozers, collect these trees, and then he tells the story of, oh shit, what have I done? I've got all these plants. Now, somehow we have to grow them out, and then somehow I don't have any money, I don't have an organization, and I somehow have to get these trees in the ground, and that was the beginning of Tree People. Another woman who started Baton Rouge Trees Baton Rouge, she was riding home in her car with her family one Sunday morning after church, and her daughter, noticing that some street trees were being cut down, she had no idea why, Her daughter said, I can't wait to leave Baton Rouge. When I grow up, I'm leaving. And her parents are like, what? And she said, they're cutting down all the beautiful trees. I don't want to live in a place where they cut down the trees. Well, within a year, this woman becomes the executive director. She kicks off a nonprofit tree organization. And it just so happened her husband was an attorney, so he helped her through the 501c status applications, and away she goes. Another story. A woman, Nancy Wolf, for some reason our emails keep getting mixed up. Nancy Wolf, Kathy Wolf, really. Anyway, Nancy's working in New York, and she is a substitute teacher. She has a couple of kids. She's an educator. She decides to substitute teach for a while, and she helps out with an Earth Day event. And part of the Earth Day event was a tree planting. And so she's helping out with organizing that, but the day of the planting, she's watching students go bonkers in this tree planting. They're having so much fun. They're learning. They're expressing a sense of, well, what can we do? This is so cool. We did a tree planting. What else can we do? And that hooked her. And she went on then with a group of people to start Trees New York. Again, decades ago. So the reason I'm telling you these stories is I imagine that each of you have a moment or an incident of passion in your lives. So as you're driving, as you're returning to your home, to work, all the busyness that comes right back at you, is to think about what brought you here. Was it a moment? Was it an event? Was it a person, a mentor? But cherish that. Think about and cherish that. And then, again, because you are health and people, you are health providers, think about how you might provide that opportunity for someone else. A young person, a colleague, someone in your family, a loved one, a friend. And think about how you might be that inspiration to carry this revolution beyond the decades where it's been happening and so on. So now what I'd like to turn to is we had all of these interviews, and we then we transcribed the recordings. We are now working to analyze the recordings. As a social scientist, there are methodologies for qualitative analysis of this sort of content. And then we are working with Arbor Day Foundation to prepare a website so that this content will be shared and available. In the works, not yet there, so this is kind of a preview of some of that material. Not only did each person talk about their early experiences, the startup, the challenges, how they overcame those obstacles, but myself, listening as the person asking questions, I heard all of this, and so there were some takeaways for me, and this was one of them, and that was the modest start of all of these organizations. What many of them said was, we didn't have any money, we were still pursuing the nonprofit status, so we couldn't get donations yet. People asked, what, you plant trees? What is this about? So many of them said that they started, somebody had some office space and gave them a desk and a phone, and they started to build their Rolodex. And then it went on and on and on to the point now, this is the entry to the Trees Atlanta organizational headquarters. It's a conference center. They have a special event center. They have a plant nursery, a tree nursery, and other facilities. As I travel about and I speak to people at different events, being a little older, I hear from people, you know, Kathy, we're struggling. You know, it's so hard. The public doesn't pay attention to trees. The politicians, they don't pay attention to trees. The gentleman who had the question the first time I was up here, our campus leadership, they don't pay attention to trees. But what I found in these stories was stay with it. The passion, the persistence. And I imagine that many of you, your businesses, your activity, your agencies, you have, if you reflect on it, what you started with. Was it just a desk and a phone? and where you are now, and relish that. That's really important, and it continues. I think it'll continue even more as more and more of the general public start to feel a sense of the importance of nature. All right, how did things start? So I mentioned that we took these interviews, we transcribed them. I'm going to share some of the text extracts with you now. All right, so the first was, what did we have here? How things started. All right, so you can read these, but let me highlight some of the bolts here. A number of people talked about, oh, it was just magic. It just sprung out of these passions in a group of people who are really committed. So look for the magic. Keep the magic. You know, some days you're working on budget or planning or just, you know, all the scheduling of your business and your activity. Remember the magic. And then this all starts with the individual embracing a tree. That's those startup groups, startup people, but who else is working with them? And then look for your partners. Look for those collaborators that can build the momentum and keep it going. So a number of them talked about the encouragement they got. And it sometimes was formal encouragement in terms of a contract or in terms of a policy. Other times it was, you know, it took us a while, but we had some champions in the forestry department, or we had a champion, there was someone in the governor's office that was with us. So look for those people who can build that encouragement. And I love this, shenanigans. So many stories about funny ideas for fundraising or end runs that they would do. You know, they'd hit an obstacle in terms of a policy or a program. Hey, you're not eligible, you can't do this. And they would find end runs. They would find other partners to work with. They would find another source of money that wasn't explicitly about trees, but it was about community or people or children or something like that. And then I mentioned this, many of them started with very modest resources, a donated office, a desk, a typewriter. Anybody remember what a typewriter is? But that was a key tool in getting out the letters and getting out press releases. Then they often talked about the stability of settling in a little bit and the ongoing connections. So let me share some of those quotes. In addition to the shenanigans, they talked about bold moves. So having an idea and putting it not only in front of their board, not only in front of their membership, but also in front of other people, particularly politicians. So for a while there were million tree programs. Some cities were having million tree programs. Those often were kernels that were first, you got someone's ear from a local nonprofit. Tree People, for instance, in Los Angeles, that was one story. They also came to realize, though the excitement was around tree plantings, they, as you do, realized that stewardship was needed, and they had to start to build in more infrastructure and more momentum and resources for care of those trees. They also found that as their local organizations, they were facilitators. They didn't necessarily initially have the authority or responsibility or ownership with regard to tree plantings, tree placement, tree permits, and so on. They had to collaborate with other local partners in order to make that happen. And they realized they had local fish to fry at home. Ultimately, all of these organizations came together into Alliance for Community Trees, which is a coalition of organizations that's still in operation today. But they really had this tension early on. Do we create a national organization and we're all kind of a part of that? Or do we maintain our local groups but build a network, an alliance network? And they decided on the latter. And so that was it. They decided on a loose coalition within which then they all maintained their individual local city identity or state identity. All right, this is where it got juicy for me. Is the reminiscing was fun, of course, but I was more attentive to what are the thoughts for the leaders of today? What are the thoughts that younger people or older people who might be getting into this arena, what can they take away? And, you know, I have focused on these are leaders of nonprofits, but even as an academic, retired academic, sort of, kinda, but as an academic, I found some tidbits, some good advice within these as well. So maybe there are takeaways here for your businesses, your agencies, other organizations as well. So what were these thoughts for new generations? First of all, many of them talked about they came to learn that they brought their passion to local government leaders and almost insisted on, hey, you have to do this. They did not get very far. They then would back up and they would attempt to learn what are the key issues in that local government. What are the constraints that an elected official might face? And so they would go back with messaging that was more directed, more relevant, more pertinent, if you will, to the leadership and the community. And in that way, bring trees to a variety of different local issues as an antidote, if you will. They talked of the many challenges of being an executive director, fundraising. A lot of them seemed to really enjoy fundraising, but also did not enjoy it at all. If you can, you know, that balance, because it was fun, putting on events, but also they, as executive directors, were the ones responsible for paying their employees and having adequate budget for projects. That was difficult for them. So many of them suggested building a reserve fund because they'd had an experience early on where they were really down to the last pennies and had to meet payroll. So they all talked about you have to build a reserve. They also talked about having an accountant. These were people, not numbers people. And they soon realized that maybe it was a volunteer with their group or someone on the board, or it was a contract, and they really realized they needed an accountant. Get yourself connected with the business community. And so many of them found that the business community, on one hand, would sometimes provide resources, be it buying equipment or providing actual dollars for budgeting. But they also found that it became, talk about mutualism, right? We've heard a bit about that. That if they tailored messaging and projects and the locations of things with the business community, it could be very valuable because they found that business people are indeed maybe more retail commercial, maybe more so than industrial or wholesale, but business people were very concerned about the image of their city and how it might attract talent might attract workers and might attract new business. So that turned out to be, for a number of them, a very important partnership. They also, and I so enjoyed this, it was like, yes, I'm so glad to hear this. They talked about the importance of science. And you have heard some remarkable science summaries. Let me tell you, the time that you have saved not having to read technical journals and articles because of the quality of the speakers here, that is profound. And that's what they told us about as well, is the scientists who not only do the research, collect the data, publish the data, there are many scientists who see that as the end of their job. Publish the data, peer-reviewed journal. But such as Dr. Crimmins and others who make that next step of translation of science to real language, natural language, relevance to organizations and people, that is really valuable. And it's not always acknowledged in the scientific community. So a number of them said, you know, we so appreciated that we had these partnerships with different scientists, with the Forest Service, with universities, and the value of very strategically placing that science in their communications and outreach. So valuable. And then some really obvious, but still we need reminders. How do you build the best urban forest? It's about the people. Yes, trees. We've learned about insects. We've learned about soils. We've learned about so many dimensions and aspects of tree care and tree behaviors, expressions, and so on. But yeah, I have a bias as a social scientist, but in urban forestry, people, really important. People who may not be directly active in terms of planting and caring for trees, but certainly those who have an influence on what happens with our work. And then, what is the meaning of tree planting? And I'll maybe challenge you on this, is I have done research on urban forest stewardship where I actually go to tree planting events, clipboards, and what I will do is approach a person who's maybe removing invasives or putting out mulch, and I'll just say, you know, would you fill out my survey? I'll do your chore for 15 minutes if you take 15 minutes and fill out my survey. And I get a much better response rate that way than if I try to catch them and just say, here, I'll leave the clipboard with you and I'll come back. Anyway. What we see in these events is so often the host event, the sponsor of the event, the sponsor, they're so intent on transmitting the technical information. So people arrive, you do a safety brief, you do a tools brief, you go to work, and then you have a little bit of a celebration at the end. Maybe there's some food, but it's like, oh, we planted so many trees, we moved so many wheelbarrows of mulch. In the research that I've been doing, what we encourage the sponsors to do at the end is to take 5, 10, 15 minutes at the end, circle around, if there's a whole bunch of people, maybe multiple circles, and reflect. Just take a moment. What was your experience? Why was it important? Why did you enjoy it? Not getting into any heavy, deep stuff. Maybe it's kind of a light forest bathing, if you will. But that level of reflection tended to elevate people's satisfaction with the event. And that can have personal consequence for them, but it can also perhaps motivate them to continue to do this work. It may motivate them to continue to be stewards, perhaps not specifically with tree plantings, but in their own yards, in their own neighborhoods with other natural resources. So go beyond our separateness. Help build capacity in communities and individuals as well. All right, so these quotes that I've shared with you, we've actually, before doing the whole formal analysis, we've compiled into this brochure, and it's now available as a PDF. So the QR code, if you'd like to grab that, take a look, I'll leave that up for a few moments. And we will, as I mentioned in time, we're working with the Arbor Day Foundation. We have some great little, some video pieces, some audio pieces, and they might be able to, we're working out how they might be downloaded for promotional sort of little segments. Okay, I'll end this first half of my presentation to, again, acknowledge and appreciate all that you do. And I suggest and encourage you to just keep climbing, leap forward. And again, I know there are challenges day to day, beyond all of that, but you're doing really important work, really important work. That includes the mentoring. You know, that moment of passion, that moment of inspiration, whatever it was for you, could you find the time, the ability, the opportunity to share that with others or to give them that space to have that encounter? And I urge you to think of scale. So some of you, I understand from conversations, you work on individual trees. You're an arborist. You do pest diagnostics, pruning, and so on. So you're working at individual trees. Others of you are looking at the entire forest. Some of you are working towards tree canopy, boosting tree canopy, or across neighborhoods, tree plantings, and so on. Keep that in mind, working at different scale, and that really helps with effectiveness. That's what we heard in the interviews as well. to move in your mind from what's really immediately in front of us and what's valuable for people to, hey, what's valuable for the entire city or county or state. And in that way, you have this flexibility. You become innovative and be able to move swiftly when certain resources or certain opportunities emerge. And I would guess that that might be possible in the business realm as well. Trees are good. It's obvious, right? But we don't necessarily share that with a lot of people, that recognition with a lot of people that we encounter. Sometimes they're clients. I've heard so many stories about arborists, the sadness that they feel when they've had a client that has a very high quality mature tree and they are hired to take it out. No good reason, no disease, it's not senescent, and they are hired to take it out. And they do so, it's business. They've got to, they've got to meet payroll. But in some way, if we can begin to bring the benefits, the values, the various services of trees to more people. And that might be through your newsletters, it might be through communications of various opportunities or sources, but you are uniquely placed to do that sort of outreach. So it was a very joyous reunion. I've shared a bit of what we experienced for 2.5 days in Atlanta. And now I'm going to shift a little bit. But before I do so, take a moment here. Any questions or comments? How many of you in the crowd, in the group here, work for a nonprofit? I'm curious. Okay, good number. Again, while this event and these lessons were generated by a group of nonprofit leaders, founders, executive directors, so many lessons, I think, that pertain to the variety of sectors that we now find in arboriculture and urban forestry. All right, I saw one question. The question was about any regrets or things that they would do differently, reflecting back on the years. A lot of it had to do with budgeting and administration. A lot of them spoke about the sleepless nights associated with, will we meet payroll? Where will the next funding come from? And so they, I would say, what I recall is a lot of the innovation and a lot of the shenanigans that they recounted and were telling stories about had to do with how to improve that situation, how to make sure there was enough money coming in. They also talked about the importance of their board of directors. I'm remembering this now. A number of them talked about, they first thought their boards of directors should be made up of tree people. People who understood trees and pruning and all of that. And they soon realized, oh no, we need a different group. And they started to look for people in the business community, a newspaper editor, what else did they talk? An accountant, former politicians, people who knew how local government works but were no longer a part of it, and so they didn't have conflict of interest situations. So they started to realize that their board composition represented different values and different resources. Yes?
Just to let you know, on our phone, the QR code that you put up there did not work.
Oh, so sorry. What I will do then is share that with the organizing team for the conference and make sure that the PDF, somehow word gets out and you're able to grab that. Sorry about that. Anyone else? All right. Let me take this another direction. all right, I supposedly am retired. I formally retired from the University of Washington about 4 years ago. And in doing that, maybe some of you had this experience as well. There's all sorts of great advice on the financial side. You know, how to manage your IRAs and how to invest and who you should have for an advisor and all that. But the emotional, personal side is not as well fleshed out, if you will. So I talked to a lot of people. You know, you're retired a couple of years, you're retired 10 years, you're retired whatever, what did you do? And yet, in the popular press, this is the imagery of what happens with retirement, right? Golf. No, at least for me, not yet. Maybe one day, but not yet. And so I have had the great pleasure and honor, really, of being invited to do presentations like this, to be invited to be part of team writers for science publications, because I bring a particular perspective that helps to round out a larger idea for a study. And I also have a lot more time. I'm not going to faculty meetings. I'm not chasing grants. I don't have to generate my own funding any longer. So with that time, I've started to think a little bit more in a synergistic way, where I was before doing original research, where research question, collect the data, do the analysis, do the publication, in my case, do the public outreach around the science. But now I have more time to sort of repackage ideas, to bring them together in different ways. So here's some of the current stuff there. First of all, the earth hurts. We heard a good bit about phenology. That is, in my mind, the canary in the mine. There are so many other things that are changing with regard to landscapes, to our environment, and consequences of that. So deforestation, biodiversity loss, the fires that are now happening and actually reaching right down into urban areas, plastics, the abundance of plastics in the marine situation and elsewhere. Anyway, so many things happening, and we're hearing more and more about it. And because I'm doing environmental psychology work, I often am in conversations where people just ask, what do I do? Or, Kathy, what gives you hope? And so it's there now. It's in people's minds. And there's a term in psychology for this. The emotional or existential distress of environmental change, solastalgia. It was a word that was coined, I believe, about 30 years ago, now coming up a little bit more in the research about how people are responding to environmental change. And again, this can range in scale from, say, a cherished forest tract or forest grove in your neighborhood that is taken out for development, and you lose this space. Or it can be on the global scale, as you hear about any number of things that are happening on a planet-wide basis. So in hearing about all of that, talking with people about it, scientists, the general public, occasionally people who are working in government, I'm trying to have these long thoughts. I'm trying to connect with the way trees exist in the world, being long breathing and restful, and they have longer lives. And I'm trying to incorporate that perspective into my work, semi-work, call it that, if you will. And one way that has been really important for me is I live in the Seattle area, which is settled on Puget Sound, and I have almost immediate access to the water. I don't have waterfront property, but it's not far away. And when COVID kicked in and we were told, don't go out, don't go to restaurants, don't go to work, and so on, I was so restless. So my husband and some friends, we just started kayaking every single weekend. We became the COVID kayak crew, and there's about a dozen other people who are in and out on our kayaking. We go out every weekend during the year, winter, summer, spring, fall. We continue to do that. We upgraded our boats. We bought dry suits. We have done self-rescue classes. We're good to go. And we've done thousands of miles, literally. Just little bits and pieces, one day at a time, maybe a week kayak camp. But what has been really profound for me on the water, first of all, the different water environments. Linda talked about kelp supplements for soils, and I immediately thought that top right image, kayaking through a kelp forest on a day when the water is smooth and looking down through there and seeing the fish, seeing little crabs. The crabs move up and down those kelp stems and they're munching on other little things, both plant and animal. And there's just this, and the water quality, the water character is different throughout the year. In the winter, it's clear and it's a more bluish color. In the summer, there's more photosynthetic activity, so the water is greenish, more murky, and you see different types of organisms and different bottom dwellers. But a remarkable part or experience of being out kayaking is that there are a lot of places on the Puget Sound that you can't reach by road, but you can approach by water. And in those places, there are these gorgeous trees. Some of them are old and gnarly because of shoreline erosion. This Pacific madrone, for instance, we approached this thing, and you can see there, I'm perched on the water, just admiring this tree. I told my friends, if you want to keep going, fine, I'll catch up. I'll paddle, I'll catch up, but I just have to check out this tree. And so what I find in that activity, and I bet you have similar things in your life. Maybe it's walking. Maybe it is cycling. Maybe it is not an activity, but maybe a stillness in some sort of place, the desert, a forest, whatever it might be. What can happen in these spaces is mind wandering. And I don't know about you, but when I was a child and I was in school, and if I looked out the window at whatever was out there, I was pulled back in. No. Look at the blackboard. Listen to the teacher. It was called daydreaming, and it was not promoted. It was not, wasn't thought very highly of. We now know that mind wandering is really important for our brains. In a general sense, it's kind of like sleep in terms of our mental capacity restoration. So it's our default mode, if you will. Think about your body. The default modes in your body, your heart is operating, your digestive system, nerves are responding to sensory stimuli. Your brain also has a default mode. You might be focusing on a task that takes attention. Remember, I was talking about cognitive attention and soft fascination. Well, likewise, your brain has a default mode, and if you're not putting it to an effort, it starts to roam and ramble, and that's when imagination that's the kernel of imagination, problem solving. How many of you ever have been on a walk, have been sitting on the porch looking at trees, and all of a sudden a solution, maybe something you're writing, something you're thinking about, maybe a family concern or issue, and pop, it comes into your mind. So, and this is really important to play as well. There are people now understanding that children, any age people, frankly, play, mind wandering is an important component of that. That freeness for thoughts and original ideas to be a part of what comes through spontaneously. All right, so professional mind wandering is I've been talking with a colleague, Usha Varnazi. She's a marine ecologist. She too is retired. And we've been talking about, hey, there's all this buzz now about Reciprocity, these beautiful books, Braiding Sweetgrass and some others. But how do we bring that into people's lives? So we're starting to do some writing. This is an article that'll just come out in about a month or so, and it's there's no paywall. Once it's out, you'd be able to grab it and read it, if you will. And we tried to make it more generally readable than most academic pieces. But we are working, brainstorming. It's kind of an agenda that we have, is to try to cultivate reciprocity in how people live, not just the relationship to nature, but how people live, their lifestyles. And why is this in our minds? Why are we thinking about this? Well, so many relationships that we have with nature and plants are in terms of commodity, in terms of utility. We rely on trees, for instance, for timber, very important, right? Create homes, create buildings, create other materials or other structures. But this is a drawdown from nature. Yes, there's sustainable forestry practices, but overall across the world right now, we're seeing a decline in forest cover. Then the term ecosystem services, which Dr. Crimmins mentioned, and this is the notion that the functions, the wide variety of functions and processes of nature generate benefits for us, generate products for us, food, air quality, water quality, all of that. But an underlying premise of ecosystem services, it's for us. It was an attempt by scientists to say, hey people, pay attention. Nature's important. This is why. Here's the full array of services that nature provides. One of the things I've been able to enjoy in the last few years, more trips for ecotourism. So for instance, on Sunday, I'll be traveling to Costa Rica. I'm doing 2 different bird tours. I love birding. But I've come to think that ecotourism is also extractive. People, myself included, I arrive at a place, I have a great time, I might contribute a little to the local economy by hiring a guide, eating at restaurants, staying at lodges and whatnot, but I'm still not giving back much to that ecosystem. I'm still not giving back much to that place. And so again, I'm trying to think about how to make that exchange a little more balanced, this notion of reciprocity. Usha and I, we have also been talking about the nature and health research, which I shared a good bit of yesterday morning. But we also feel, as we talk about these pathways to health, from those nature experiences, the different elements, moving all the way to health outcomes, it still is what nature gives us. There's not a lot embedded in this research about what we return, what we give back, maybe even what we might have to sacrifice in a modest way in order to give back. So now, Usha and I, one article coming out, we're shouldering in, attempting to write the next version, which will have a little more detail. So here are some of those thoughts. The first is One Health. I did a project with a broad group of science specialists, ecologists, public health, landscape architecture, some others, sociology, in Peru, a city on the Amazon, and it was a One Health project. So we simultaneously evaluated the health of the animal population, local animal population. We evaluated, I was a part of a team, we evaluated the health of humans within the riverside environment, and then we attempted to understand the broader environment health, particularly the water, the river. So One Health is one idea of this reciprocity, is in research and in evaluating the health, don't isolate just humans or don't isolate animals, but what is the comprehensive, what is the whole here? And it's not easy. It was the most complex research project I've been involved in. And team meetings early on, because we were all using different words that meant the same thing, and it took us a while to figure that all out. Also, part of this, I think, a challenge is nature blindness. Have you ever talked to someone about, hey, look at that cool tree? I've never noticed that tree before. And they've lived in the neighborhood or they've driven by it how many years? I believe, observation, anecdotal, I believe nature blindness is becoming more prevalent because we've got our eyes on the screen. I don't know how many times I've been in a park and I'm enjoying a trail and I pass someone, and in these instances I say, heads up, because they're on the screen. They don't even see me approaching. And likewise, they don't see anything that's surrounding them. I think this is perhaps another obstacle to the idea of reciprocity. So what are we trying to do? What is reciprocity? Well, it's relational. It's having a sense that the world, the nature, the environment is not the other, but it is me, and I am it. Yeah, I'm getting a little philosophical here. That's what happens with retirement, just saying. But it's in part conservation behavior. It's about thinking the resources that you use, is there any way to do that more responsibly, more efficiently? And it's about cultural connection, to recognize the differences across all of us. Maybe not so important right now in the current administration, national or federal administration, but there's great richness in recognizing other people and how they have crafted their relationship with nature. And then there's engagement, connecting, touching, being on the ground, being in place. That's what many of you do. You either by way of your clients or working with schools. I've heard some of you have worked with schools, some of you have worked with hospitals, some of you worked with neighborhoods. You are providing that opportunity to connect and engage locally. Kinship is a word that we've come to try to understand because it's used very much by people of First Nations or Indigenous people. And it's even hard for me to understand how can you think of place and landscape in the same way that you would think about your partner or your child or your extended family. And that seems to be how some, not all, but how some Indigenous people describe kinship. It's a formative connection. You learn from, they learn from you. It's time. It's extended amount of time. It's not instantaneous. It's not one meeting. It's not one gathering. So these are a couple of books that I've been reading to try to better understand this idea of kinship, as well as some direct conversations with people who know a lot more and who actually live this. And I mentioned yesterday forest bathing and forest therapy and dope slap. Something I didn't clarify, but I have had a couple of people approach me here in the day or two, and they said, "Is this like getting naked and getting in a bathtub or in a springs?" They're like, "No. This is you can do that if you'd like. That's fine." This is about time in a sort of, if you will, structured way, so that you come then to a more kinship, relational sort of encounter with nature in a brief way, an hour or two, with then this range of health benefits that have been determined or been learned about in various places. And to this time now, because of the recognition and understanding, and likewise greater advocacy, there are now hundreds, maybe thousands of forest bathing guides. People, just as there is ISA certification to acknowledge your education, your experience, and then provide a credential, there are people now with forest therapy credentials, and they likewise go through a training, they go through a practicum, and then they do an examination. So they are now specializing. Some of them are specializing in workplace opportunities. Some are working with youth, children, adolescents. Some are working with hospitals and clinics with regard to trauma. So I think by way of this gaining more recognition and more acceptance, it might be another channel or another pathway, if you will, to reciprocity. The founder of the North American Forest Therapy Association Amos Clifford, has written these wonderful little books. If you are interested in this and sort of the roots or the sources of thinking about forest therapy here in the United States, look for Amos's books. Reading them is like having a conversation with a friend. Very quick reads, but he has come from a variety of traditions and experiences and therapy and counseling, and just, he's a guy from California, you know what that means, right? He's done some woo-woo things in his life, but he's pulled that all in together to a practice that many people are coming to appreciate and to enjoy. And he talks about imaginal capacity, that this time within a forest bathe, a guided forest bathing experience, maybe it's kind of equivalent to mind wandering, but in an imaginal capacity for other ways for us to engage with nature, be a part of it, develop that kinship. And he speaks very fluently about that. I love whenever I have an opportunity to be around him, because he's sort of like Yoda, you know, he's just real chill guy, but then he starts talking about this stuff, and it's really thoughtful. All right, reciprocity, you know, they're still, you know, why would people adopt a reciprocity outlook? It may actually involve some sacrifice. I've kind of reviewed my own everyday practices in my home, and there's things that's like, oh, I don't want to give that up, but I will, or I'll reduce consumption or something. My greatest climate guilt yet is flying around in an airplane. I just have to say, there's really no way. I mean, you can buy credits, right? Credit offsets and not, but still, it's really hard for me to let go of the travel because I enjoy that so much. So anyway, that's what this process is understanding what's really of value to you rather than what is marketed to you and you just sort of accept without any consideration. So what we try to talk about as part of this activity, part of moving toward all of this, is what are some human health carrots, if you will? What do you gain? What do you that utility thing? What do you gain by practicing reciprocity? And one is gratitude. There are all sorts of studies. I won't even offer citations here or references, because if you Google, either Google General or Google Scholar. Google Scholar is great for pulling up these peer-reviewed publications. But if you Google then nature experiences and gratitude, all sorts of studies come up about why you gain benefit from that. And a number of people tell me over the years, oh, my garden, I feel so much gratitude for that. It's so important to me. Or school kids will talk about their outdoor classrooms. Oh, this is so cool. We like this so much. So gratitude, I think, is an element of reciprocity, and it has then health consequences. Some research in the past decade or so has looked at awe and wonder and what do we gain in terms of our health, stress reduction, anxiety reduction. There's something about seeing or experiencing something that kind of blows you away. It's like, wow. And you gain some health benefit from that. And we North Americans, as I have traveled and worked in other nations, we North Americans tend to regard the awe encounter as that which is away from the city. It's up in the mountains. It's over in the shoreline. It's not just right around me, but it is. And that's what Children in Nature Network, for instance, is a resource. If you're working with children, it's a wonderful set of studies, programs, green schoolyard design, all sorts of materials. But what they are helping people, adults, to do is to help children experience awe and wonder within their everyday environment. You don't have to travel great distances. You don't have to go away from the city. It's there around us if we take the time to look for it. And for you to create it. Create those places where people can go for a moment and encounter awe. The flower, the pollinator, whatever, a novel plant, if you will, of some sort, a great little piece of the desert that is intact and doing what it does so well. You can help create those situations of awe. Another element of this, the kinship, is place attachment. I have a colleague who's an environmental psychologist. Her entire career has been to study place attachment. And that is that there are places that, be they small, be they large, be they near, be they far, are really important to you. And associated with that is place identity. There might have been, particularly for children, I have places I recall from my childhood that have great meaning, and they're totally different now. But there's an identity that I feel because I had those experiences as a child or as a young adult traveling in different places. So place attachment is now being incorporated into urban planning in some instances. So that figure on the right is a map that was done in a community planning workshop. And the map is there, and people are asked, what's special to you? What are the places here that are special to you, and why? And now we understand that that is quite important to our identity. It's quite important to how we interact with landscape, we interact with place, and we interact with other people who share that place attachment. That, I think, is another thing that we might bring you as urban foresters, arborists, and those working with landscapes. How do you create the places that nurture place attachment? How do you create the places that are special enough that people experience wonder, they experience awe, they have a great time, they planted some of those plants, and it becomes more meaningful to them in the way that they might then take more care of the environment in their lifestyles. So all of this is turning then to an idea that is also in environmental psychology, is environmental responsible behavior. That's what I've been trying to nurture in my life. It's not easy. There are so many obstacles. There's so much marketing for buy more stuff, buy a new thing, buy bigger stuff. I'll just say, my daughter, I think I mentioned, she's a wilderness guide in Alaska. She calls herself a gear whore. Because, let's see, North Face, a company comes out, whoa, new color, new design, it looks cool, it works better. And she and I, we talk about this. We try to control not buying new things when we have what's already adequate and really cool already. So anyway, nature connectedness, nature relatedness, how do we nurture that? How do we bring people to a place and a situation where they feel more connected with nature and are maybe then more willing to take action to give back? All right, you're all just about ready to go here. Let me wrap this up. Retirement adjustments, I think I've explained a little bit about how it started out kind of like, this is what's happening. Oh, this is great. And reciprocity is one of the ideas that is great fun, working with colleagues, attempting to understand what this means, not only as an academic idea, but what does it mean for how people live, and the importance of kinship in all of that. And the importance, rolling back to the very beginning of this, the importance of nonprofits, the importance of agencies, the importance of people who help others, to support others, to get out and enjoy trees, to engage with the landscape, and to learn more. So they asked me to put this up. I know this is really important to all of you. There you go. Thank you again so much. Wonderful event, everyone. Safe travels home.
All right, before we let Kathy leave the stage, we've got to give her gratitude cookie. So thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing your research and your time with us. We've loved having you here.
Awesome.